Okay, so this one is personal. Bullying affects everyone in some way, and the trauma that results from it can be debilitating to your career, let alone how it affects your mental and physical health and well-being. I'm not pulling any punches today. I get real and vulnerable and talk about my experiences of bullying, and I share surprising ways it can affect your job performance and give you some tips on how to deal with it. So let's get stuck in. You're listening to the Career Change Podcast with career coach, mum, and ex-corporate girl, Gina Hubbard. This is a no BS discussion about everything to do with your career, including how to make those hours at work happier, easier, and more fulfilling so that you can get on with living the life that you want. So, let's get going. Hello friend, how are you doing today? Well, we have a big juicy topic that I want to talk about: bullying and workplace trauma, also referred to sometimes as corporate trauma. Now, I have a certain sort of kinship to this topic. Firstly, because I am passionate about trauma and how it affects us and changes our behaviour. And secondly, because I have been on, shall we say, the receiving end of workplace trauma a couple of times. Probably, if I sat down and thought about it, more than a couple. Because we all experience trauma, like no one is excluded. And the topic of workplace trauma is just a small or sometimes not so small wedge of the type of trauma that we will encounter in our lives. And you can't talk about workplace trauma without addressing the bullies in the room, because outside of the big T trauma like physical trauma at work, most other workplace trauma, not all cases, but most of it, is caused by bullying of some kind. Okay, so let's jump right in. What is workplace trauma? Let's start there. So workplace trauma is the effect of our nervous system not finishing a stress response to a traumatic event. So something happens at work and your vagus nerve is triggered and you go into a sympathetic state, also known as fight, flight, or freeze, and that is a stress response, right? It's a state where our amygdala, which is known as our primitive brain, that's what I call it. You've probably heard me say that a few times over the podcasts. Well, that part of our brain, the amygdala, it takes control and we respond or behave in a way that keeps us safe, which is the fight, flight, or freeze response. So when we are in a fight, flight, or freeze state at any level, we will respond in a way that keeps us safe. And if we have the resources and coping mechanisms to close the loop and finish that stress response, then you will experience very, very minimal, if any, trauma at all from it. Now, if you don't have the coping mechanisms or resources to close the loop, your nervous system is overwhelmed and it will stay open and you will experience trauma. So trauma is stored emotional energy that you haven't been able to adequately process from a stress response. So if you think of trauma like the volume dial on an old-fashioned radio, right? Depending on how unsafe your primitive brain thinks you are, depends on the level of the trauma response that you will have. So how your brain interprets the circumstances you are experiencing will depend on how much that volume dial will be turned up, so how intense your trauma response will be. Now, if we have the resources to be able to process that trauma response, if we are able to process what is happening for us physically and emotionally, then that volume dial will turn all the way back down again. Now, if we don't have the resources or have resources to process some aspects of the trauma we've experienced, then that volume dial stays on and the unprocessed emotions are stored in our bodies. And that is where the terms small t and big T trauma come from. It's just how much that volume dial is turned up in a stress response. So trauma isn't like an on-off switch where you either have it or you don't have it. It's on or it's off. But it comes in varying degrees, like a volume dial on an old radio. Now, I believe in the world that we live in today where we are quite closed off to how we feel and distracted by technology. It's very, very easy to self-soothe with drugs and alcohol, food and social media, among other things. And we have small t trauma and we don't even realize it because we use those things to distract ourselves and to make ourselves feel better. So that is a very quick lesson on trauma, and I could talk about this stuff for a very, very long time, but it's actually not our focus today. Today is talking about how you might be experiencing workplace trauma and what to look out for and be aware of, and what you can do if you find that your trauma responses are holding you back. You see, workplace trauma can be quite sneaky. We are supposed to be safe at work, aren't we? Right? And unless you have a very physically dangerous job that you sign up for, the rest of us who work in offices generally don't expect to experience trauma, but we do, unfortunately. And as a strong an independent woman, you might think that you've developed a tough skin to the conflict and toxic environments that you work in. But sometimes it can be difficult to know if you really have processed through any incidences you experience at work and have truly, truly moved on. So many years ago, I was working on the front desk for a freight company. So I was the first person to greet customers as they came through the door. And one day a van full of very angry people arrived and they came in and they started to yell and verbally abuse me for a courier package that they didn't receive in good condition. They had received it and it was damaged. And they were incredibly intimidating. They were ripping pictures off the walls and smashing them on the ground. They were throwing things. They were yelling, punching the walls, the windows. They were swearing. And one of them pointed at me and told me that he was going to kill me. And there were 8 very large men, and there was me. And it was an incredibly frightening situation to be in. I was in my 20s at the time. Now, looking back at that incident, I know in the moment that I did not have the resources to close the emotional loop, to process what was going on, to help my nervous system calm down and resolve the emotions of fear that I was experiencing. And so in order to cope, and this is unconscious, right? In order to cope, my brain allowed the incident, or my brain actually shaped the incident and shaped my beliefs about working in the freight industry and about the people who came into the office so angry that day. My brain made a quite, in its mind, logical leap that these people were dangerous and need to be avoided at all costs, for now and forever. And even today, when I see a white van full of people, I can kind of feel it in my stomach. I get this tightening, a clench, and my heart starts to race a little bit more. And that is my trauma response from something that happened over 30 years ago. My unresolved emotions from that initial incident. So you can see how if you haven't been able to close that stress response loop at the time of the original incident, your primitive brain will adapt your behavior and beliefs to keep you safe in case something like that happens again. Now, if you're multitasking, come back to me here because this is really important. I'll say that again. If you haven't been able to close that stress response loop at the time of the original incident, your primitive brain will adapt your behavior and beliefs to keep you safe in case something like that happens again, and you don't even consciously usually realize it. Which means workplace trauma can reframe how you make decisions at work and can redefine what you think is a safe working environment without you even realizing it. You can even be going through the job ads and without even realizing it, skipping over jobs, thinking that they're not suitable, not really realizing why, just get this gut feeling that they're not right for you. That could be a trauma response. This can affect the jobs, obviously, you decide to take. I mean, I've never worked in that industry again, though I'm pretty sure it's not solely because of that incident, right? It can affect how often you put yourself out there at work if you've been shut down, yelled at, or bullied in front of people. And it can even have detrimental effects on your ability to earn what you're worth, because your learned trauma response could be to keep quiet, to not speak up, to not ask for what you want, because in the past it has been unsafe to do so. So the question then is, how do you know if you have workplace trauma? Well, if you've ever been bullied at work, chances are that you have some level of workplace trauma that is unresolved. So we all know what a bully is, and workplace bullies haven't changed much from their days in school where they used to push around the smaller kids and steal their lunch. But now as adults, bullies can be found in almost every organisation and at any level, and the effect that they have on their victims can be huge and long-lasting. But workplace bullies are not created equal. Some of them are sneaky and manipulative, and you aren't even aware that you've been bullied until you start seeing the signs. Sneaky bullies usually want to manipulate you into doing something they know you don't want to do or can't do. They will appear friendly and supportive, maybe even charming, and will tell you what you want to hear and will appeal to your generous and helpful nature. They might try to gaslight you by making you question your own thoughts and beliefs, or even things that you've seen or done. And you'll know when you've been a victim of a sneaky bully, when what you've been manipulated into doing doesn't feel right, or all of a sudden you kind of, you wake up and wonder how you got to where you are. See, here's the thing, most bullies don't bother trying to hide their behaviour though. I mean, they shout, some of them, they criticise, they make fun of others in a hurtful or personal way, and they even like to use the weakness of other people to feel strong about themselves. They will criticise you in meetings, putting down your hard work. If you've been bullied at work, you'll feel a huge lack of confidence usually. You will try to avoid your bully as much as you can, going to great lengths to not be in the same room as them because they don't feel safe. So on that flip side, you'll feel alone. Bullies are two-faced, so are able to be normal and nice to other people who don't see or experience the behaviour that you do. So you might feel like you have no one to talk to. And because of their nature, bullies can often be seen as getting stuff done by management, and their behaviour can be labelled as, in air quotes, a strong and firm management style. So victims often don't speak up because they don't think anyone will believe them, or because they don't want to be seen as complaining and weak. So this kind of workplace trauma is more common than you think. So please know you are not alone, even though it might feel like it. So ask yourself these questions. Just think about these. Has there been a workplace incident that upset you enough that you still think about it? Could it be something like being made redundant, being placed on performance management. If you've had a conflict or an argument with a coworker or a boss that has left you sort of red in the face, your heart racing. Have you been harassed? Have you experienced racism or discrimination? Have you been ridiculed or belittled in front of co-workers or other managers? Do you work in a toxic work environment? Are you experiencing extreme isolation? Is there chronic pressure, or do you have an excessive workload, long hours? Are you subjected to aggressive or intimidating management? Have you ever had an accident or seen someone have an accident at work, like a physical harm accident? Have you experienced being excluded, shut out or shut down? Have you gone through a restructure or a redundancy process, even if that process was done to the letter of the law, if it was perfectly done and you were fully supported? Have you experienced unjustified threats of dismissal or disciplinary action? Have you ever been threatened or intimidated by a co-worker? This is not a finite list by any means, because what causes trauma in one person might not cause trauma in another person. It's heavily dependent on your experiences and coping mechanisms at the point that you experience the trauma. We are all unique. We all grow up differently. We come from different cultures. But that is a pretty good list of bullying behaviour that can cause workplace trauma. So how do you know if you've got trauma from an incident and haven't just closed the loop and just have a bad memory? Well, that depends on how you feel and how you respond now. And it can be difficult to know what behaviour is an adaptive trauma response and what trauma incident it is attached to. But it's highly likely that you have trauma when you think about an incident now and it brings up emotions like anger, frustration, shame, or embarrassment, anxiety. And you find your body getting tense when you think about this incident. You find it difficult to focus and get distracted easily. You get confused easily or are more forgetful than normal. You're getting very poor sleep. Like it takes a long time to get to sleep, or you get to sleep and you wake up through the night. You consider leaving your job to get a fresh start and dream about what it would be like to not be in that environment anymore. It might be that you don't like talking about the incident because of how it makes you feel, or you find yourself always bringing it up, maybe even complaining more than usual. It could be, like for me, just driving past your place of work causes you to feel tense and brings up negative feelings. You might find that you allow the residual unprocessed emotions dictate how you show up at work now, maybe. Like maybe you don't volunteer to lead meetings or projects and you've seen a shift in your behaviour. You don't speak up in meetings anymore. You lack the confidence. You hide your ideas. You stop yourself from doing or saying something for fear of the repercussion of being shot down or told to be quiet, that your ideas and values don't mean anything. You don't put your hand up for promotions. You don't ask for salary or pay increases or other benefits. You see, the effects of workplace trauma from bullying are very, very real, my friends, and can be extremely detrimental to your mental and physical health, let alone the negative effects to your career. Now, in my research, I found some frightening statistics from a study done in 2020 by the New Zealand Human Rights Commission. Now, admittedly, this was over 2 years ago, but I think it's probably still relevant today. 20% of the people surveyed had experienced workplace bullying in the last 12 months alone. 40% of them had experienced bullying in their lifetime, and 44%, that is nearly half of them, had witnessed someone else being bullied in the workplace. I will link the document and the website that I got these stats from in the show notes. If you're interested, go and read more. There's a lot more to that study. It's not a particularly nice read, but it is really, really eye-opening. And I would actually like to be able to say that there is absolutely no excuse for workplace bullying. However, a big caveat here, I think that when we are bullied or experience a stress response and our primitive brain goes into fight, flight, freeze, that an adapted behavior that we can have in response to this can be to bully right back, to go into fight. And I say this because it happened to me. I did it. I have been in the past in a situation where I was being bullied, and in response, I too became a bully. So to give you some context, I was being bullied by a person who thought that they were my manager incorrectly, and this person was struggling with their role, okay, and they wanted to make it my responsibility to help them do their work and do their work for them, right? Okay, so parts of this person's job I had very kindly been picking up when I could in the past, because I'm a recovering people pleaser. I put my hand up, and I had been people pleasing this person, but I had changed roles into something different. It was a promotion, and it wasn't my responsibility, and it wasn't a responsibility that I could take on in this new role. And so I said no. And I put in a professional and reasonable boundary. And this other person didn't like it. And that is when the bullying began. I did an episode on people pleasing. I don't have the number of that episode off the top of my head, but go back and have a listen. It's only a couple ago. When you get a chance, it's a really good one. And I will link it in the show notes as well. So anyway, I took months and months and months of this behavior. I reported it to my manager, who did nothing. And now in hindsight, I can see how my behavior started to change in response to this bullying. I had been putting up with this behavior for months at this point. And it wasn't silent bullying. It was very public, trying to shame and embarrass bullying, right? My response or adapted stress behavior was to fight back. And because I wasn't raised around physical violence or shouting and yelling, so what that means is I wasn't taught at a young age that it is a normal and okay response, so repeated the pattern, so I wasn't taught that. So because that didn't happen, I got caught in a pattern of bullying behavior that I was taught at a young age, which was excluding and isolating the person who was bullying me. And it sounds like a perfectly okay response when someone is bullying you to remove yourself from them so that you feel safe again. And in hindsight, I can see a pattern of isolating either other people or myself when I don't feel safe in a situation. Unfortunately though, in the workplace, in the role that I was doing at the time, it was definitely bullying. And I put my hand up and I admit that. So yes, I do believe that we can all do better. And I do better now. But it's definitely a multifaceted problem, especially when you come at it from a trauma angle and a trauma response angle. And we see this in bullies in school, right? The bigger kid will bully a smaller kid, and then that smaller kid will go on and bully other kids who they perceive as smaller or less than them. It's about control, which in a trauma response is what our primitive brains are desperately trying to gain. Control of the situation so that we are safe again. So, okay, well that's great, Gina, but what do we do about it then? So out of all of this, whether you are the bully or the person being bullied, it's really important that you don't jump to assumptions and blame yourself. Don't turn it around on yourself. Talk to someone, a friend, a family member, or a mentor, someone that you trust. If you can raise a complaint with HR or your manager, asking them for their support in making the behaviour stop. That's not unreasonable. Make sure that you keep notes of when the bullying occurs and the details, right, of what happened, what was said, how it made you feel, especially how it made you feel. But please remember that you might only be able to do this at some point after the incident, right? In the moment, your primitive brain is in fight, flight, freeze mode, so taking notes might not be something you're able to do. But afterwards, take as many notes and jot down as many details as you can. You always have the option to take legal action, but a lot of people don't have the means or the resources, and I understand this. And this can sometimes make things worse for your work too, though, right? With the bully doubling down on their efforts to hurt you, especially if nothing comes of it. There are also fantastic coaches and therapists who specialise in helping people through bullying at work and through trauma. And I'm one of those coaches, by the way. You can always reach out. Asking for help is the very first step, but it can also be the hardest. And there is a stigma, like a culture of it being weak to ask for help. And that is my life mission, to break that down and to help people get the help they need so that they can have the lives that they desire. And at the end of the day, you have to do what you need to do to keep yourself safe. So please do consider leaving if it's really that bad, and get another role and reach out for help. Both in how to leave, help in, how do I leave, or what are my next steps you need to take. But also help to completely process the emotions that are stored in your body so that you can move forward being your strongest and best self and make decisions from a non-trauma place. Unresolved emotions from trauma are heavy and exhausting, and the body remembers and the brain does its best to protect you, and be able to release and process these emotions can change your life, because then you aren't weighed down anymore. I suffered years of bullying at the hands of this person I was talking about, and it just led to burnout for me. And when I left that job, I was exhausted in all the ways that a person can be exhausted, and it took me a long time to recover and heal, months, but it was worth it, I promise you. So I have listed the following resources, in the show notes for you, and they include a great article on bullying in the workplace from the Community Law Organisation. You can contact the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment to request mediation in a bullying or any other employment matter. You can seek advice from Worksafe New Zealand's Health and Safety Inspectorate. And you can contact your union if you belong to one. Or you can also contact your local community law centre. The links to all these places are in the show notes for those of you who are listening from New Zealand. If you know anything about me by now, you'll know that awareness and education are the first steps, and it's not a perfect process. And that is the whole point of this podcast, to help raise awareness and to encourage change through education and coaching so that you can have the career and the life that you want, that you deserve. And here is what I really want you to know. You are not alone. You are not alone. Workplace trauma and bullying affects everyone and can be harmful not only to your physical and mental health and well-being, but also to your career, progress and happiness. You deserve to be safe at work. You deserve a career that fits your life, that brings you all the rewards that a satisfying and amazing job can. It is yours to take. If you can see it, you can have it. And I believe in you, and I hope that one day you can see just how amazing you truly are, because you are. Hey there, are you ready to know exactly why you can't make any progress in your career? If you've been working hard and are feeling burnt out and trapped, but you're not sure why or you don't even know where to start to make positive change, then I've got you covered. Imagine what it would be like if you could earn the salary that you want, feel energized by what you do, and be free of self-doubt. And I'm here to tell you that you can. Your lack of confidence might be holding you back, and you might not even know it, so let's fix that. Click the link in the show notes to get my free masterclass on the 3 ways your lack of confidence sabotages your career and how to turn it around and get the salary you deserve. Inside, you'll learn the 3 key ways you might be sabotaging your own career, how these show up for even the most accomplished and self-aware women just like you and me, and how to get your mojo back, reclaim the power in your career, and start finally earning the salary that you deserve. Born out of the blood, sweat and tears of going through this myself and the hundreds of hours of coaching women just like you to their own career success, the 3 ways I'm teaching in this training are little known and hardly talked about. So head over to the show notes now and click the link to get the free and instant access to this masterclass.